I was looking for a change of scenery, a place where I could focus on writing without the usual distractions of my apartment. Savannah, Georgia, seemed like the perfect escape. Its rich history, beautiful architecture, and quiet charm made it an ideal destination. After scrolling through dozens of listings on Airbnb, I found what seemed to be the jackpot. A small but charming house with glowing reviews. The photos were mesmerizing. Tall windows let in streams of golden sunlight that danced on polished hardwood floors. There was even a cozy writing nook that overlooked a vibrant garden. Guests raved about the host's attentiveness, calling the house a hidden gem. Without hesitation, I booked it for a week. I imagined early mornings spent sipping coffee, afternoons lost in my writing, and evenings basking in the warm glow of the quaint Savannah sunset. Little did I know I was stepping into a nightmare. I arrived on a blistering August afternoon, my car packed with essentials, a suitcase, my laptop bag, and a stack of notebooks filled with half-finished ideas. As I turned onto the street, my excitement faded. The neighborhood was nothing like I'd pictured. Instead of picturesque homes and tree-lined sidewalk, I was met with boarded-up houses, graffiti-stained walls, and a disconcerting number of police cars patrolling the area. I double-checked the address, hoping I'd made a mistake, but the GPS confirmed it. This was the place. The house itself looked exactly like the photos, clean, bright, and welcoming. Its cheerful exterior felt like a mirage in a desert of decay. I told myself the neighborhood was just rough around the edges. After all, I'd planned to spend most of my time indoors writing. I unpacked, set up my laptop at the writing nook, and tried to settle in. Yet, a strange unease clung to me, an inexplicable feeling that I couldn't shake. I dismissed it as nerves. New places can be disorienting at first. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, I noticed something strange. Every time I glanced out the window, there were people lingering on the sidewalk, their eyes fixed on the house. Their stares weren't casual, they felt deliberate, invasive. Once, I caught a man pacing back and forth, his gaze alternating between my car and the house. I tried to focus on my work, convincing myself it was all harmless curiosity. The house stood out in the neighborhood. Maybe that's why it drew attention. But the nights were worse. On my second night, I was jolted awake by muffled voices outside. Peeking through the curtains, I saw two figures standing on the sidewalk, gesturing toward the house. They didn't appear aggressive, but their presence at that hour was unnerving. After a few minutes, they walked away. The following night, around 11 p.m., I was working late when I heard a faint thud against the side of the house. My breath hitched. It wasn't a loud noise, but it was deliberate. I rushed to the window, but nothing seemed out of place. I brushed it off, though the creeping suspicion that someone, or something, was nearby lingered. By the fifth night, the unease had morphed into full-blown paranoia. The neighborhood was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that amplifies every creak and rustle. Around midnight, as I typed away at my laptop, I heard it, a soft scratching sound. At first, I thought it was an animal, but the sound grew more purposeful, like someone testing the window frame. A cold knot formed in my chest. Slowly, I crept to the front window, careful not to make a sound, and peeked through the blinds. A figure stood there, hunched over the window, their hands pressed against the glass. They were trying to see inside. My heart slammed against my rib cage. Ducking down, I scrambled to the corner of the room, out of sight. My fingers trembled as I dialed 911. "There's someone trying to get into my house," I whispered to the dispatcher, my voice shaking. "Stay on the line," she said calmly. "Officers are on their way." The minutes stretched into what felt like an eternity. The scratching grew louder, followed by a dull thud. It sounded like they were trying to force the window open. I clutched a heavy book, ready to use it as a weapon, though I knew it wouldn't do much. Then, just as suddenly as it started, the noise stopped. I peeked out again. The figure was gone. When the police arrived, their flashing lights illuminated the street, providing a brief sense of relief. 2 officers searched the property while I waited. still trembling. They didn't find anyone, but fresh scratch marks marred the window frame and footprints led to the back fence. "Looks like someone was trying to break in," one of the officers said. "Probably thought the house was empty." "But it's not," I replied, my voice cracking. "And this isn't the first time I've felt watched." The officers advised me to find somewhere else to stay for the night. As they left, one of them glanced around the neighborhood and muttered, "You're brave staying here alone." The next morning, I called the host. His cheerful tone vanished when I described what had happened. This area has its quirks," he said vaguely. "Quirks?" I snapped. "Someone tried to break in last night. Why didn't you mention the crime in your listing?" After a long pause, he admitted, "It's happened before. A few times, but it's just part of the area's charm, you know." I hung up, furious. Packing my things, I left that afternoon, vowing never to return. When I reported the incident to Airbnb, they refunded my stay and assured me they'd investigate the host. But the experience left a scar. Now, every time I travel, I research not just the property, but the neighborhood too. The house may have looked like a dream in the photos, but it turned into a nightmare I'll never forget. Photography has always been my escape, my way of finding order in chaos. After a grueling month of deadlines and client demands, I decided to take a trip to Denver for some much-needed solitude and inspiration. My plan was simple: spend mornings exploring the city with my camera, and evenings relaxing in a quiet space to edit my work. After scrolling through countless Airbnb listings, I found what seemed like the perfect fit. The house was small but charming, with wooden floors, a retro kitchen, and a cozy couch that practically begged me to sink into it. The listing mentioned it had 2 stories and a basement, though the basement was described as unoccupied storage. It seemed harmless enough, and the host assured me that the house was private, quiet, and ideal for creative work. The price was reasonable, the reviews were glowing, and the neighborhood was noted as peaceful. I booked it without hesitation, eager to escape the stress of my daily life. When I arrived, the house was exactly as described: warm, inviting, and just what I needed. The wooden floors creaked gently underfoot, adding to the homey charm. I spent the first 2 days following my routine: mornings out on shoots, afternoons editing photos, and nights falling asleep to the rhythmic hum of the radiator. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary, and I started to feel at ease. The house had a lived-in feel that I found comforting, even with the occasional groans of the old pipes or the creaks of the floorboards. But on the 3rd night, something changed. I was up late editing a batch of photos when I heard it, a soft noise from below. At first, it sounded like the radiator acting up, but as I paused to listen, I realized it wasn't mechanical. The sound was irregular, almost like something heavy being dragged across the floor. I froze, straining to hear. The noise stopped as quickly as it had started. I shook it off, convincing myself it was just the house settling. Old houses make weird noises, right? But the following night, the sounds returned, louder and more distinct. I was in the kitchen reheating leftovers when I heard the unmistakable creak of wood under pressure. My heart skipped a beat. The sound came from directly beneath my feet. I paused the microwave and stood completely still, listening. This time, the noise was followed by a muffled thump. It was too deliberate to be a coincidence. Slowly, I turned my head toward the basement door at the end of the hall. It was closed, with a padlock hanging loosely from the latch. I stared at it, my mind racing. Why would the padlock be undone? The next morning, I texted the host, mentioning the noises. His reply was almost immediate. "Old houses make all kinds of sounds, nothing to worry about." Something about his casual tone rubbed me the wrong way. It felt dismissive, almost rehearsed. But I didn't press him further, hoping that I was overreacting. That evening, I tried to focus on editing photos, but the noises were louder than ever. It wasn't just shuffling now. I could hear distinct movements, like someone pacing back and forth. My curiosity, or maybe my fear, finally got the better of me. Grabbing a broom for protection, I approached the basement door. My hand trembled as I turned the handle, but the door wouldn't budge. It felt stuck, almost as if something on the other side was pressing against it. Leaning closer, I tried to listen through the wood. That's when I heard it, a low, raspy cough. I stumbled back, my heart racing. Someone was down there. I spent the rest of the night barricaded in the bedroom, the door locked and the broom still by my side. Every creak and rustle of the house sent my imagination spiraling. I barely slept, my thoughts consumed by the possibility that I wasn't alone. The next morning, I called the host again, this time demanding answers. "Are you absolutely sure the basement is unoccupied?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Well," he hesitated. "Technically, there's someone down there, but he's harmless." My blood ran cold. "What do you mean someone's down there? You said it was empty." "He's a long-term tenant," the host admitted. "He's been there for years. I don't include it in the listing because it scares people off, but I promise he keeps to himself." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I hung up, furious and terrified. The idea of someone living beneath me, listening to my movements, was unbearable. That night, I couldn't take it anymore. I packed my bags, planning to leave at first light. As I was zipping up my suitcase, I heard it, the faint creak of the basement door opening. My blood turned to ice. Slowly, I crept down the hall, peeking around the corner. The door was slightly ajar. I held my breath, backing away. The thought of confronting whoever was down there was too much. Instead, I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight, aiming it toward the basement. A shadow shifted just beyond the threshold. "Get out!" I shouted, my voice trembling. "I'm calling the police!" The shadow didn't move at first, then, slowly, the door creaked shut. I heard the sound of footsteps retreating down the stairs, followed by silence. I didn't wait for morning. Grabbing my bags, I jumped into the car and sped off into the night, adrenaline coursing through me. The next day, I filed a report with Airbnb detailing everything that had happened. They refunded my stay and promised to investigate the host. I never followed up, too shaken by the experience to dig any deeper. To this day, I can't stay in a house with a basement. The thought of someone lurking just out of sight, watching and listening, still haunts me. I learned a hard lesson. No matter how perfect a listing may seem, some things are hidden, both in the house and in the host's description. Life as a nurse is chaotic, and after weeks of exhausting shifts, I desperately needed a break. I found an Airbnb cabin in Asheville, North Carolina, tucked away in the woods, offering peace and stunning views. The host, Alan, seemed friendly and responsive, assuring me I'd love the place. When I arrived, it was everything I'd hoped for. The air was crisp, the cabin cozy, and the large windows perfectly framed the surrounding forest. That first night, I slept deeply, lulled by the quiet of the mountains. The next morning, I received a text from Alan. "Hope you slept well. The bed's super comfy, isn't it?" It felt thoughtful, so I replied, "Yes, thanks," and went about my day. I spent hours hiking nearby trails and returned to the cabin tired but content. As I prepared dinner, another text arrived. "Hope you enjoyed the trails today. The view from the porch is incredible at sunset." I froze. I hadn't mentioned hiking or being on the porch. It felt like he was watching me. The next day, his texts became more specific. "Did you try the rocking chairs on the porch yet? They're my favorite spot for coffee in the morning. The fireplace is great on chilly nights. Bet it feels cozy now." I hadn't told him about using the porch or lighting the fireplace. It was as though he was narrating my actions. That night, As I curled up on the couch with a blanket and tea, another message came through. "The couch looks comfortable, doesn't it?" My stomach churned. I was sitting on the couch at that very moment. The next morning, I tried to shake off the unease, but as I sipped coffee on the porch, I noticed something chilling: footprints. They led from the tree line to one of the cabin's windows, the one I'd been sitting near the night before. Someone had been standing there watching me. Panicking, I rushed inside, locking the doors and windows. Before I could call Alan to confront him, another text appeared. "I hope you're finding everything to your liking. Let me know if there's anything I can do to make your stay more comfortable." I knew then this wasn't paranoia. Alan was watching me. I packed in a frenzy, my heart racing with every sound from outside. As I zipped my suitcase, I heard the crunch of footsteps on gravel. Frozen with fear, I grabbed my flashlight and approached the window. The forest was dark and silent, but the feeling of being watched was overwhelming. Without looking back, I threw my bag into the car and sped down the dirt road, glancing at the rearview mirror every few seconds. At a gas station with cell service, I reported everything to Airbnb: the invasive texts, the footprints, and my overwhelming fear. They offered a refund and promised to investigate. A week later, I learned Alan had been banned from the platform. It turned out he'd been reported before for stalking behavior, with guests catching him lurking around their rentals. Even now, I can't bring myself to book remote Airbnbs. Large windows that once seemed inviting now fill me with dread, and I triple-check every lock before I sleep. The experience taught me one hard truth: no matter how perfect a property seems, you can never truly know the person behind it.